Very warm welcome. At Hyde Park tonight, we will talk about the local economy going global and what it means to large, small and medium scale enterprises and industries in Sri Lanka. To discuss all this and much more, we've invited to our studios an entrepreneur and industrialist, a local manufacturer, large-scale exporter who has been quite vocal for a long time about the challenges that the local industries are facing. May I warmly welcome to our studios at Hyde Park, Mr. Samantha Kumarasinghe.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, Mr. Samantha Kumarasinghe, Chairman of the Advisory Committee of the Cosmetics Sector under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Chairman of Nature's Secrets, and also a patron of the Ceylon National Chamber of Industry. So I believe we'll be able to talk about a wide range of topics concerning not just the cosmetics and the manufacturers' industries, but about the economy. I'd like to talk about the country's economic growth. Gross domestic product has been, the GDP growth has been seen to be on the decline in recent times, but there are assurances, new assurances that disruptions seen during this year and the latter part of 2018 will be recovered, and Sri Lanka's growth will be on par with expectations. Now, this is what the World Bank and the country's central bank is telling us.
Our problem in Sri Lanka is certain governments start believing what the World Bank says and what the IMF says, and they don't listen to or they don't hear what the local industrialists talk about and what they tell the government. So this is the major issue, that certain governments trying to satisfy the World Bank or IMF and ignoring the local industries have repeatedly shown that the strategies they adopt to satisfy the World Bank or IMF is not going to help the local economy. You can see the trend in the recent years when this present government came to power and implemented these policies of the World Bank and followed their instructions of IMF. The GDP growth rate, which was about 5% in 2014, dropped continuously, and today we have dropped by 2018 it came down to 3.2, and 2019 ADB projection is 2.6% growth, which is the bottom in the SAARC countries. Today we are even below Afghanistan, so there is no further down that we can go. So this is because we are blindly following the international instructions how to run this country. That is the problem.
But there is also concern raised by these international organizations which say that the political controversy last year towards the end, sometime this time last year, led to most of the complications that the economy is facing today.
That is totally wrong information, and you know, I mean, people living in this country knows better than what the World Bank says. World Bank wants certain governments, certain things to adopted. Any change that the government or political systems trying to do against their will is badly criticized by the West. So that is their practice. So if you listen to those figures, those stories, we will even go further down. So we have to now at least realize that the practices they have adopted in hoping to build the economy has not given them any results. We have only gone back. So what? So we have to have our own methods, own systems brought into the economic development programs.
I'd like to talk a little about something you started the program with, that local industrialists, that governments do not listen to local industrialists.
Of course.
But have you taken this up seriously with the government? At what platforms? How have you reached out to them?
You know, it is very evident that governments don't listen to the industries that much. And because if you take one agreement that was signed in 1998, Indo-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, and because they have blindly signed that agreement without looking at what is going to happen to the local industry, Local industry started after it was signed in a hurry by the then President Chandrika Bandaranaike when she visited India, and it started implementing from year 2000. For year 2000, by about 2004, 2003, the local industry started to basically collapse because of the products coming in from India where we could not compete. We were not ready. The local industries were not ready. So then, with the next government coming into power from 2005 to about 2010, that period, they introduced different special para-tariffs like cess. That import cess was introduced to safeguard the local industries. If not, all the local industries would have been dead by now. So that was the certain mechanism, corrective measure taken by that government to rectify the damages caused by the previous agreement. But that agreement cannot be changed. This is a bilateral agreement which cannot be changed. So now we can only put different, trying to damage control, putting plasters here and there, try to control. But damage was done in 1998 because they did not listen to us. The Indians listened to the Indian industries, and they brought in an agreement to us. We, without studying it, without asking proper from the local industries, they signed it, and then the repercussions were faced by the industrialists. Then came in 2003, there was a proposal to sign CEPA, but with the government change, it surfaced again in 2005. And at that time, CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, that we pointed out so many lapses in that agreement.
But this agreement was proposed as a measure to address the existing difficulties and the challenges in the already existing FTA.
You know, the agreement signing is an art. It's also a tool to develop businesses for countries. Like if you take the masters of this agreement signing is USA. They signed over 100 agreements with the Red Indians who occupied that country by the time the Americans arrived there. But every agreement from number 1 to 99, all those agreements were broken by the US and signed another agreement to rectify the problems of the first agreement. So who broke it? It was the Americans who broke it, and who lost from the second agreement, third and onwards, until they disappeared from that soil, was the Red Indians. So therefore, we don't believe in signing an agreement and to rectify the problems of that agreement, signing another agreement. So always there is a remedial method included in the agreement, has to be, if not. And by that, you have to correct it. So what we told is first correct the lapses of the FTA before going for CEPA. That is how it never happened up to now.
Are you saying that local industries, local enterprises, local expertise does not have a say in anything that the country does, from agreement making to decision making when dealing with global powers?
Actually, I can't say there is no say at all, but of course there is some say. That is why we have been able to delay these and at least to prevent some things happening. But it is depending on the people in power. Some governments listen to local industries, and if you look at the economy, during the periods the governments listen to the local industries, the economic indicators have been good.
So does that also mean that during the past few years, with the decline and the downturn of the economy, that also alludes to governments not paying heed to local industrialists?
Of course. I mean, if there were ministers, I think maybe even in your studios, they would have come and spoken. They say, whoever tells what, we are going to do what we want. I mean, we are going to sign this agreement, whatever people say. And that is what the politicians who come to power with the votes of the people do. If that is the case, how can the country or the industry benefit? Industry has to be looked after. If not, there is no point telling, okay, go and export without giving the ground situation right for the industry to
talking about
survive.
exports, Mr. Kumarasinghe, now this government has continuously, during their budget proposals over the past years, they've continued to show and demonstrate that export-oriented economy is what they're looking at. You're a large-scale manufacturer, you're an export going global. Hasn't these policies supported you?
It's like this, if you can tell anything saying we support export industries, but on the after saying that, the tax benefits that were given to the exporters were taken out. If you take the last budget, 2018 budget, I think, the export revenue that was taxed at 12%, the tax rate was increased from 12% to 18%, so 28% to the normal tax. For any industries that did not export more than 80% of their turnover. So most of the local industries are exporting certain percentage, so they get discouraged, and they discourage them by policy, and by statements they say we are encouraging local industries for export. So how can they export?
Are you discouraged? Is the industry hurt?
Of course. Industries, because the industries are run with so many difficulties. Running industry is not like running a normal business of imports and selling. So that is what the West wants us to do. That is what the IMF wants us to do. That is what the World Bank wants us to do, to import from their countries and sell in this country. And what do? Then close all industries and be consumers only. But then how do the consumers find money?
But the IMF, it is Sri Lanka who went to the IMF, asking the IMF to bail out the economy. And then even after the October political change that we saw the IMF withdrawing its disbursements. And then in more recent times, we saw the government going back to the IMF. But it seems that we have been engaging with the IMF, asking the IMF to be a policy, give us policy perspective, tell the economy where to go. How do you look at this?
You know, IMF is a bank. It's a bank, right? Whatever the big letters they have, it's a bank. Their bank is giving money to one of their bank's clients. So Sri Lanka is a client. So take a small example. Take my business. If I don't manage my business right, my bank, today I can call the bank and tell them to give me funds. They give me my funds because I manage my business right. But if I don't manage my business right, and take wrong decisions, business decisions, and my business goes down, I start making losses. So the banks will come and tell me, okay, you do this, you do, don't do this, you sell, move this line out from you. They will start giving me instructions how to run my business. So it is same. So first the government should know how to run the country. If a government comes to power and say, okay, we can't manage state-owned enterprises, so we want to privatize them, I don't think that government should come to power at all. So likewise, there should be a capable government. Incapable government will always have problems like this, IMF dictating their terms. If not IMF, maybe ADB, any bank will dictate. So this is a problem. So
this government, just to add to that too, was seen as a government that was very welcomed by the business community. You, a member of the business community, well known for your for the contribution you make to the economy. Isn't this what you wanted?
I don't know where you saw the business community welcome the government at any point. I was not one of them. I am not welcoming any government, this government or other. But if there were some business people, they would have been importers of foreign products to sell. Maybe otherwise, there was no real policies given at the beginning. When this government came to power, they were talking about Yahapalane. That means it was fair government and nothing to do with business development. They did not take, they came to power through some other showing corruption of other government, and so many stories people believed, and they managed to come to power. But the government policies are the policies that we look at, not the respective Prime Minister or the President.
I think on that note, we'll take a short commercial break at Hyde Park. We'll return soon. Hyde Park. Tonight we're talking to Mr. Samantha Kumarasinghe, local industrialist, exporter and of course a contributor to the Chamber of Industries of Ceylon and the chairman of Nature's Secrets. Mr. Kumarasinghe, you've been talking about policy perspective, why policies change, how it hurts local industries. I'd also like to touch on neoliberal economic ideology, about how countries have developed. There is consensus and there is ideology that countries can be developed, and Sri Lanka embracing these policies will go a long way in achieving our vision 2030 or 2050. But are local industries also included in this?
You know, neoliberal economic policies were developed for the benefit of the Western countries after the Second World War. I will, before coming to that one, basically what neoliberal policies talk about is free market economy and cutting public expenses for social services like hospitals. So whatever free given to the people should be withdrawn or cut. Then privatization of government enterprise. I told earlier also, if a government can't run a government enterprise, then there is some problem. So they have to rectify that problem rather than selling it off to a foreign country or to the private sector. I'm from the private sector, but government institutions should not be sold to the private sector. That I don't believe. Then these are neoliberal economic policies that originated from the West. I'll come to that, how it really originated. Then deregulation, including environmental regulations, including safety of people. So deregulation has to be done under neoliberal policies to facilitate large corporations who are ruling the world. So now this is what they like. Who is funding IMF? Who is funding World Bank? The large corporations, those countries are funding them. So they work for the benefit of those corporations. But if we take those policies and try to implement without correcting them or adopting it to the local requirements, then you are asking for trouble. I'll take you to some subject that many people don't talk about. After the World War II, World War I and World War II both happened in Europe. And after the Second World War, basically entire Europe was bankrupt. Those Europeans who were ruling these countries like us as their colonies had to withdraw from these places. And after that, their income that they got from their colonies were totally affected. Then there was a big think tank that met in 1947 in Switzerland in a small city called Mont Pelerin. It's a small mountain city in Switzerland. They decided on certain policies and made the society group of about 39 people met, especially from US and UK and other countries, European countries. It was organized by Austrian-born British citizen called Friedrich Hayek. Friedrich Hayek. He was later, that was in 1947. Right. He formed this Mont Pelerin Society, which is a very fluid organization. They don't even have an office, but they control so many structures in the world, and they are funded supported by these large corporations. And at the same time, 1947, that period, 45-47 period, World Bank was formed, IMF was formed, and these society members who are very powerful managed to control those institutions for the benefit of their wealth development or economic empire development.
I'd like to talk a little about the Mont Pelerin Society that you mentioned about. You said they control policies, economies, shift economies. Is Sri Lanka also
yes, of course.
Affected?
That's why I said many people don't know this subject. These are very invisible organization, Mont Pelerin Society, but still it is a very powerful organization. But there are about, up to now, from 47 to date, there according to the list of members, there are about 500 members some even there are 3 Sri Lankans as members of that organization. And whenever, one is of course is a prime minister of the country. And whenever they come to power, these non-tolerant society members come into different positions of the country in setting economic policies, but they don't come as members of that society.
But if we have Sri Lankan members in this society, does it not mean that we will be benefited as a result? What are the objectives of this society? This
society was, as I told you, they wanted to have to ensure that there are no wars fought in Europe after that. If you take after 1945, there were no wars fought in Europe. If you take the European, after that, Korean War happened in 50 to 53. Vietnam War happened in 61 to 73. Then Iraq-Iran War. All those wars, including Gulf War, happened outside Europe and US. And that they have ensured. And they have ensured that the European countries get their income through all these structured organizations like the World Bank and IMF. And not only that, you have so many people. I told only 3 Sri Lankans are members up to now in this organization. Some have been members and not members, not in the member list now, but only 3 people. And if you take in 2016, so 2015, one of those members come as the chairman of IPS, Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. So that particular organization is also, it's a semi-government type of organization, but they go as a think tank, but they are funded by all these non-tolerant society linked organizations. So they are basically obedient to those societies who are funding them than doing service for the country. They were the proponents of this CEPA agreement, which was not signed because of our protest and our pointing out the points to the government, and also ETCA, because they are supporting this kind of free trade, the neoliberal policies. So that is why we have this problem. Then you have, in 2016, there was another organization formed in Sri Lanka. They appear as donor agencies, but they are not really there to help us. They are there to help somebody else. We have to understand that. We have been brainwashed from the British colonial time. We were brainwashed when this agreement in 1815, when we signed an agreement with the British, our kings and signed the agreement. That agreement was going to help us. Finally, we became their colony. So I can tell you another good example of a story. Like maybe you are too young, you don't know much about this Mahadana Mutta story. Mahadana Mutta story was taught to us as coming from our folklore. When we were school children, it was there in the school books of our school books. But that itself, it says Mahadana Mutta means the most learned old man in your village. And what did he do according to the stories? He went and did all stupid things, right? And then people started laughing at our Mahadana Mutta. So, but then if our most learned old man doesn't know what is right, whom should we ask? We should ask the British rulers who were ruling this country by force. And that is how we were brainwashed. That is how we were brainwashed, that we are an incapable nation. So there are some politicians also coming and believing that kind of things. That is why they say we can't do. That is why they say we can't run our government institutions. We have to privatize. Give it to the West. Now we privatize our petroleum corporation part. Where did we give it? We gave it to an Indian government body. And how can Indian government manage it better than our government if governments don't know how to run business? So that is why it is a question of capability and believing in yourself. If you don't believe that we can do, we will always fail.
What changes are you proposing that we make to the state sector in order for governments to run efficiently and to run these state-owned enterprises effectively? We're talking about Corp has found continued losses in the national airline and all other state enterprises. With all this, how do you propose it? You have been a successful entrepreneur, businessman. What are your proposals?
I think you have to address that problem if you take the port or the railway, whenever a government comes to power, the minister will give employment for maybe 1,500, 2,000 people and fill those places with people who don't have any work to do. And I think we have more employees in our railway, maybe 10 times than what is required, because every government has been filling them. But that is not what we should do. We should then do that, finally sell it to some other country, because saying we can't manage. So what is the problem? Is it because we can't manage it, or we are doing a wrong thing by allowing politicians to bring their cronies into the management? So you have to give the right people to manage. If I run my business and if I bring all my relations and put them into my business, it's going to happen, it will also be an unprofitable organization. Then I will also have to sell it. So it is my problem. So likewise, the politicians, at least now, the people should tell the politicians, enough is enough. They should do the right thing, rather than telling that we are incapable. We are not an incapable nation, but we have people, wrong politicians, believing that we cannot do, believing that what the West is telling is right, which is not. Those organizations are there to serve their people. And when I go and do a business in Vietnam or Bangladesh, I'm not going there to work for that country. I'm going there to make money for my country, develop my business, bring that money here and reinvest. You take these multinational companies who are operating here for 100 years. You think they are helping this country? Why are they here? Because they can make money. If they can make money employing our own people, why can't the government employ our own people and make money?
Talking about these enterprises and about doing business globally with other countries, exporting to other nations, because the export industry was hurt. We saw the export market not expanding as envisaged. But the government also says that development of manufacturing industries and products that will cater to the demand of other nations is a lagging area in Sri Lanka, and also that we don't have enterprise, we don't have people taking initiative to enterprise. How do you look at this?
Indeewari, now if you say that you want to develop local industry to do exports, the ground situation has to be made for them to survive first. A baby who is born new cannot walk, or a young baby cannot run. So you have to help them to become a man or a grown-up to run, and then help them to become a working level person. So likewise, local industries have to be nurtured to be strong enough to go to other countries and export. Every company who is starting cannot export the next day. But who is facilitating that? The government can come and say, okay, we are opening the economy, this is the most protected country. All lies. I mean, I export cosmetics to Bangladesh. Duty there is 110% to 125%. In Sri Lanka, the maximum is 30%. But ministers in charge of these trade policies, they say Sri Lanka is the most highest protected country. They say the tariffs are so high. It's not true.
Have you raised this with the government? Because we see protectionism as a trend in most European countries. With the US, the president, his election campaign was on protectionism, America first, and he's going into a trade war with the largest economy in the world, China, to protect US economy, US products and US manufacturing based companies. But in Sri Lanka, have you taken this up with the government?
Of course, we take it up with every government. And if you take this example of China, China is a country who did not listen to the IMF, who did not listen to the World Bank, and who did not allow these neoliberal policies to affect their industries. And India is also somewhere there. So now what has happened is China has started exporting their products to the US, and US is getting hit by their own policies that were created by them to export their products to the developing countries. But the people who did not follow those instructions of the IMF World Bank developed the local industries there, developed their industrialists, and they are now exporting back to those countries like US. So now US is hurt because their industries can't compete with Chinese products. Now they are trying to ignore World Bank instructions, ignore IMF instructions, ignore the same policies that they once said perfect for the economic development, like these policies of neoliberal policies, and now they are clamping down taxes on those imports. So this shows that the neoliberal policies have failed in the world. Actually, neoliberal policies, we are somewhat still safe, because we have not totally implemented these neoliberal policies, thanks to some governments not following instructions to the rule. Okay. But if you look at the countries, first neoliberal policies were implemented in South American countries, starting from Chile, right? When there were government resistance for certain governments, they even get those governments toppled. Right, you can see some parallel examples in our part of the world also. Governments changed by the interest of the Western forces to implement their economic policies in these countries for the benefit. Now, if you take neoliberal policies implemented in Mexico in the first 20 years, by year 2000, over 100,000 SMEs were destroyed. Right, they went bankrupt. And over 10,000 government institutions were privatized. Today, what is the situation in Mexico? So much of drug trafficking, so much of crimes. I don't know whether you saw a recent video going that when one drug lord's son was arrested, they went openly and started firing the innocent people, and police had to release that person.
Lawlessness, society.
Yes. So because that is where we are taking the countries by becoming poor, because country becomes poor when selling off these institutions to the foreign countries, like leasing of Hambantota port. We were publicly opposing it from our chamber. Young Lankan Entrepreneurs, I'm also a member. We even paid money and put advertisement in the paper, one full page advertisements in papers, and said, please don't do this.
I'd like to talk a little more on that after this short break at Hyde Park. Do stay with us. We're talking to Mr. Samantha Kumarasinghe, a local industrialist and exporter. You have been quite vocal against agreements that were proposed for Sri Lanka to enter into. And also in more recent times, we're talking about defense agreements with the United States, but there has also been an economic perspective to this. You continue to, before we went into a break, you did mention about the Hambantota port here, how foreign nations are getting involved in strategic assets of the country. But where do we go from here? How do we manage these international superpowers? Because Sri Lanka has become so dependent on these nations, especially with the debt we have, and also in terms of how we have engaged with these nations.
I think coming back to the debt issue has to be controlled by controlling expenditure, government expenditure unnecessary, as well as unnecessary imports of so many luxury items to the country. And we have to say, for instance, we are a rice growing nation, but we depend on wheat flour. Wheat flour is coming from either US or Russia or those countries. And why can't we grow our rice? And so if there are, I think Sri Lanka is the only rice growing country that consumes so much of wheat flour. So then you have so much of alcohol consumption here. And those are affecting even family lives. Social structures are damaged because of this alcoholism in the country. So many things have to be addressed. First thing is, government should know where to put their money and what to do. But selling off national assets and consuming that money for food, imports is not right. So that is one area that the government should look at. Then even take fertilizer. Fertilizer is imported, but local organic fertilizer is not encouraged. Those are things that we can, because those are areas where we spend recurrent expenditure every year for importation of so much consumables. And then Hambantota port is another thing that we shouldn't have done. We have done it now. You can see the repercussions even now, because so many countries are challenging about giving it to China, and they say it is for a problem for their security. And I don't think we should have done it. But after doing it, correcting it will be very difficult. So likewise, other agreements like Millennium Cooperation Agreement, those are proposed agreements like SOFA and AXA. Those are also agreements proposed by very powerful, rich countries for the benefit of theirs. I mean, we didn't go and ask for this agreement. So they propose it because of our strategic position of our country. But when we do that, then we will have other problems from other powerful nations. Then you have to give in something for them. Now, likewise, if you take Hambantota port, because we gave Hambantota port, India may be asking for the Trincomalee port. Somebody else will want something else, because they will think about the one country becoming too powerful in this very strategic location. So we have to balance it. If you take, we can learn a lot from Finland. Mm-hmm. During the Cold War, when Russia was fighting with the Cold War with the West, Finland benefited so much because they managed both sectors right. They were not on one side. They were independent country and they managed their independence. But they benefited economically so much. So that is a story that our people should study. Our politicians should study. Our policymakers should study. Our economists should study. Unfortunately, when it comes to economists in this country, all those the universities who produce economists, they teach these neoliberal policies, because they have, that's why I told, these organizations who promote these are very powerful, and they get what they want taught even in our universities. Mm-hmm. So they come out believing that, or they are taught neoliberal policies are the right policies. So when they graduate out and they come to a job, they think it is right. So we have to put a practical aspect into this teaching as well. Things like economic theory is taught today. And coming back to the World Bank and IMF, how their policies have affected our country. Now, if you take, we had the DFCC and NDB, those were two development banks that Sri Lanka had, mm-hmm. for the benefit of the industry and development of the industries. And under the World Bank instructions, those two banks were privatized in 2002, I think. Today, the same politicians who were involved in privatizing those two banks, now they come and tell, we are going to have start a new development bank. But under the same instructions of the IMF, World Bank, still they believe in, they sold it, or rather privatized it, and now they are trying to restart it. But if we didn't do that, our industry would have gone into a much better position. Then we would have been a much stronger economy by now.
But this also comes to the fact that Sri Lanka doesn't seem to be able to believe in themselves, our governments, our policymakers, our economists and industrials, because if we are to be going back to the IMF and World Bank to take instructions from them and not have our own policy structure, which means Sri Lanka is not confident. But how do we revert into an economic model that you talk about that veers away from all these Western kind of thinking that we import into our country? How do we have a homegrown policy perspective into our economy?
So you listen, now there is an election coming, right? Presidential election coming, then a general election coming. The public should listen to both parties and see who is trying to come with a homegrown solution, and then take a decision, because otherwise people should get involved in politics, at least decision making. The right decision has to be made as a voter in the first place. If they don't take the right decision, And if they believe these Western fairy tales that they tell sometimes, like that Mahadanamutta story I was telling you, and then they will make the wrong decision. And if they bring the wrong people to power, and they expect the same results, because they will be working not for us, they will be working for their the masters in living in other countries. That's the problem.
You mentioned about the presidential election, which is just about around the corner, and I'd like to ask you, with just a few election manifestos also of at least the two main candidates declared, is there anything that interests you from the manifestos, not the candidates?
I'm sorry, I did not see the second one. First one I saw. First one I see, there were some very good points about local economy and developing the local entrepreneurs, and that kind of things I have seen. I have no time to go through in detail, but we have, from our industry point of view, we have given our proposals to both main two candidates. From we have an organization called LIFE, that is Lanka Industry Forum for Empowerment, which consists of all the industries that are registered at the Ministry of Industries. I'm representing them as the chairman, that organization called LIFE. From that, we have given our proposals to both candidates.
What are your key proposals?
Key proposals, one is to have a separate ministry for industries. Today we have Minister for Industry and Commerce. So we must have a minister, cabinet minister for industry, and bring all industries under them. If they want to reduce the number of ministries, bring science and technology under the minister, not commerce. Commerce is competing with industry. Commerce is importing and giving to the public. Their commerce minister's role is to keep the cost of living down. So he is more busy in importing and giving. So it's not going to help the industry. So it's a wrong decision to combine the two. Science and technology is more appropriate to be under with the Ministry of Industry. Then if the other one is, if we gave about 15, I don't have time to read everything. But one thing that we told is, do not sign any more FTAs with any other country until these agreements are rectified. Especially the Singapore agreements should be made null and void, which had so many problems for the country. And Singapore being a small country, I don't think they can do much to even if we do not follow what we have signed. But so therefore we must put pressure on them. There are very few Sri Lankans doing business in Singapore, but there are many Singaporean companies already doing business in Sri Lanka. So therefore we can put pressure on them that they should come on to certain agreement with us to change these negative areas. Then the other thing we have suggested is to remove this international arbitration from trade agreements, because international arbitration never helps Sri Lanka. Because we are a very small country, we are not financially powerful. This international arbitration is also a tool used by the West to do whatever they want in their large corporation, to do whatever they want, even destroying environment, and they are for the oil rigging or maybe for any other businesses that they do, and overrule the national law in those countries. So we should, whatever the agreements which we sign, a country like Sri Lanka should make those agreements subjected to the local law, not international arbitration.
Right. We have about a minute. Of those proposals, I'd like to talk about the FTAs. Sri Lanka already has FTAs that we have entered into, and you want Sri Lanka to declare null and void the Singapore agreement. But hasn't these FTAs benefited Sri Lanka at all in terms of, let's take the FTA with the Indo-Lanka FTA. As an entrepreneur, as an exporter, what has it been? What benefits have you seen in going forward for us, for Sri Lankans, and why SEPA? Why do you not want an enhanced version of it?
You know, when Sri Lanka signed FTA with India, Sri Lanka was exporting about less than 5% of our total exports to India. After 20 years, we still export less than 5% to India. So can you say it has benefited Sri Lanka? No. Because that agreement is not drafted according to the strengths and weaknesses of our country. They have looked our strengths, weaknesses and all the loopholes in our systems and drafted the agreement. We have accepted it. So this is the problem. So if you don't address these issues and come into agreements with other countries, we can live without agreements. Why should we have free trade agreements? It's like a fashion. For all the politicians, they want to say, okay, I signed agreement with this country, that country. And when we asked the chief negotiator of Singapore agreement, why we are signing an agreement with Singapore, which is a country which has no duty on anything, basically. He said, when we sign with agreement with a country like Singapore, all the other countries will look at us and come to an agreement. So that kind of a silly answer he gave. And this is why, because of maybe one politician's interest to give some benefit to some of their supporters, they sign for these kind of agreements. That is a problem.
I think on that note, it's time we wrap up tonight's discussion. But thank you very much, Mr. Kumarasinghe, for your time here at Hyde Park.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. We had with us Mr. Samantha Kumarasinghe, Chairman of Nature's Secrets, a local industrialist and large-scale exporter of cosmetic products, and the Chairman of Advisory Committee for the Cosmetics Sector of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, also a patron of the Ceylon National Chamber of Industries. Thank you for joining us tonight at Hyde Park. Good night.